My dear brothers and sisters, the question has always been, when will these things end? When will evil come to an end, and when will nations stop targeting America? What you are about to hear reveals a dark truth that is about to unfold, and it is truly disturbing. I kindly ask that you tell us where you are watching from so that our prayer team can include you in our daily prayers. Please watch this video to the very end. I will now begin sharing this experience. I want to begin by telling you something before anything else. I am not here to put fear in your heart. That is not why I am writing this. I am not a man who enjoys watching people panic or tremble. Please be patient and you won't regret watching this. I have been a pastor for over 30 years. I have sat at bedsides when people were dying. What I will give you is the only thing I have left to give, which is the truth of what I saw and the message that came with it. And the message is this: the elect of Jesus Christ will be preserved. I want you to hold that before you read anything else. The elect of Jesus will be preserved. That is the beginning and the end of everything I am about to tell you. Whatever you feel as you read these words, whatever discomfort or doubt or fear begins to rise in your chest, let that sentence sit underneath all of it like a foundation, because everything else I am going to say is heavy, and you will need something solid to stand on. My name is Pavel Dmitrievich Morozov. I am 61 years old. I was born in a small city called Tver, which sits between Moscow and St. Petersburg in the middle of Russia along the Volga River. I came to faith when I was 23 years old, at a time in my country when faith was not a comfortable thing to carry. I have been a pastor since I was 29. I have served the same congregation for most of that time. We are not a large church. We have never been a church that fills stadiums or produces programs with expensive lights. We are ordinary people who love God and try to live that love honestly. I tell you this not because it matters who I am, but because I want you to understand who I am not. I am not a televangelist. I am not a man with a following to protect or a brand to promote. I am an old Russian pastor who, on the 14th day of June in the year 2026, stopped breathing in a hospital corridor and went somewhere that I am still not entirely sure I have the language to describe. I had been admitted to the hospital 2 days before that. A pain in my chest that I had been ignoring for several weeks had finally become impossible to ignore. My wife, Natalia, had been asking me for months to go to the doctor. I had been saying yes and meaning later, the way that men of my age often do when the body begins to send signals that the mind does not want to receive. She finally stopped asking and simply drove me there herself one evening, when the pain moved into my jaw and my left arm felt heavy and wrong. She was right to do that. She has been right about most things for the 34 years we have been married. They admitted me and ran tests and gave me medications and told me the situation was serious and that I needed to rest and not exert myself. I was doing that, or trying to. On the morning of the 14th, I was sitting in the bed, reading the Psalms, which I had been doing for most of my time there, when the pain returned suddenly and with a force I was not prepared for. I remember pressing the call button. I remember Natalia looking up from her chair in the corner and rising quickly. And then the pain became everything, and I do not remember anything between that moment and the next thing I am going to tell you. The next thing I am going to tell you is that I was somewhere else. I did not arrive gradually. There was no slow brightening or floating or sense of moving through space. It was simply that one moment I was in a hospital room with a pain that felt like the end of everything. And the next moment I was standing somewhere that I can only describe as more real than any place I have ever stood in my life. The ground under my feet had a quality that I do not have a word for in Russian or in the English I am trying to write this in. It was solid, but it was also lit from inside, as though the matter it was made from was the same substance as light. The air was not air exactly, but something that the lungs of the spirit receive the way lungs of the body receive oxygen. I breathed it and felt completely, perfectly awake in a way I had never felt in 61 years of living. I was standing there, just standing, taking this in, and then I heard something. I heard my wife's voice. I did not see her. But I heard her the way you sometimes hear a sound from another room that comes through the wall and arrives at you muffled but still recognizable. She was calling my name, Pavel, Pavel, the way she says it when she is frightened. The second syllable held a moment too long, the way it always goes when she is trying not to cry and cannot stop herself. Pavel. I heard it clearly, and I knew in the way that you know things in that place, not by reasoning, but by a kind of direct knowledge that simply arrives in you. I knew that she was standing beside my bed in that hospital room calling my name because something had happened and the machines were alarming and the nurses were coming. I knew I had died, or that something very close to dying had happened. and the sound of her voice, the realness of her fear, came to me clearly, and then the environment around me began to shift, and her voice grew quieter, and I turned because the place I was standing was changing. I want to take a moment here, because I need you to understand something about the next part. What I saw completely. I was present for it, the way you are present for something you experience with your whole body and your whole mind at the same time. Not a dream, not a vision in the sense of something gauzy and uncertain. I was there, I watched. And every detail that I am about to give you, I have carried since that morning, with the same completeness and the same clarity as the moment it was shown to me. I have not lost a single piece of it. I believe that was intentional. What I saw first was a den. I do not mean a den in the sense of a decorated room in a family home. I mean a den the way the word is used in the old scriptures. A place of animals, a dark place, a confined place that smelled of something wild and alive and ancient. And in this den there were lions, 4 of them, large and fully grown and absolutely present in the way that lions are present when you are in the same space as them, which is to say you feel them before you fully see them. They were resting, calm. Their breathing was deep and slow, and their eyes, when they moved, held the kind of intelligence that you do not expect to see in an animal, and that unsettles you when you do. And then I saw the sheep. There were 4 sheep as well, and this is where the vision became something that made no sense to me at all for a long time, because the sheep were not afraid of the lions, not even slightly. They were moving among them the way sheep move in a field when there is nothing threatening them, that casual, wandering ease that animals have when they feel completely safe. One of them, a white sheep, actually lay down against the side of one of the lions, just lay its body against the lion's flank and rested there. The lion did not move, did not even turn its head to look. I watched this and I could not understand what I was seeing. In all my years on this earth, everything I know about lions and sheep tells you that this is not possible. This is not how the world works. A sheep does not rest against a lion because the lion will kill the sheep. That is the nature of the thing. That is the reality. The sheep does not know this in the way a human being learns things, through study and information, but it feels it. The animal knows in its body that the lion is a danger. It is encoded in the sheep, and yet here were 4 sheep who seemed to have lost that knowledge entirely. They moved among the lions without hesitation. One of them even seemed to be playing, moving toward a lion, and then away, the way young animals play when they feel safe and comfortable, and are not thinking about anything except the immediate pleasure of movement. And the lions let it happen. The atmosphere in this vision was strange to me in a way that I keep coming back to even now as I write this. There was no one else there. There was no shepherd watching over the sheep. There was no keeper watching over the lions. There was no boundary between them, no fence, no barrier of any kind. Just the 4 lions and the 4 sheep in this den together, and the sheep completely unaware of what they were in the middle of. I watched and I felt something that I can only describe as a deep unease that had no specific fear attached to it yet. Just the knowledge that what I was looking at was wrong, in a way that was about to become visible. Then the lions moved. It did not happen slowly. The moment the lions began to move with intention, everything changed in an instant. The sheep felt it first. I could see it in them before the lions actually did anything, that sudden animal alarm, the head coming up, the body stiffening, the eyes going wide. And then the lions were on them, and the scene became what it had always been going to be, which was a slaughter. The sheep ran. They ran in every direction, colliding with each other and with the walls of the den, making the sounds that sheep make when they are dying, which is a sound I will not try to describe in detail, because it is not something I want to give you in detail. What I will tell you is that there was nowhere for them to go. The den had no exit that the sheep could reach. They had been in a contained place with predators and had not known it, and now they knew it, and the knowing had come too late. And here is the thing that broke something open in me as I watched. As the sheep ran and cried out and the lions pursued them, I began to hear something change in the sounds. The crying of the sheep, that animal sound of distress, began to shift, slowly, not all at once, but gradually. The way a language you are hearing from a distance begins to resolve into words as you move closer. The crying of the sheep began to sound less like an animal and more like a human voice. And then more. And then unmistakably I was hearing the crying of people. Not animals, people, men and women. People in pain and people in fear and people who were grieving something enormous. The sound filled the den, and then the den stopped being a den. I was looking at something else now, something much larger. The lion's sounds had changed as well. The predatory sounds of the hunt were becoming something different, something that carried triumph in them. I heard what I can only describe as cheering, the sound of people celebrating a victory. And beneath that sound, under the cheering, was the crying of people. And I watched as flags appeared in what I was seeing. The way flags appear when you are looking at something that has to do with nations, with places, with the idea of countries and peoples and histories. I saw the flag of the United States of America, and I wept. I want to be honest with you about that. I wept before I even knew what I was seeing in its fullness. Something in me recognized the weight of what was being shown before my mind had caught up with it, and the weeping came from that place, the place where understanding lives before language arrives to name it. I wept for a nation I have never lived in but have always respected. A nation that, for all its faults and complications, I have watched from my side of the world with the understanding that it was a place of something real and rare and worth preserving. And then I heard the anthem, the American national anthem, which I know well because I have heard it at international events and in films, and in the way that the music of powerful nations travels across borders and becomes familiar to the whole world. I heard it, but I heard it being sung in a way that it is not supposed to be sung. It was being sung slowly, with a grief in it that changed the character of every note. The way a hymn sounds when it is sung at a funeral by people who love the person they are burying. The strength had gone out of it. What remained was the melody, and the melody, stripped of its strength, sounded like a lament. I stood in that place hearing that anthem, and I did not understand. This was the thought that kept moving through me as I tried to take in everything I was seeing. I did not understand how I had arrived at this from what had begun as a scene with animals. I did not understand how the crying of sheep had become the mourning of a nation. I did not understand the connection between a den of lions and the flags of countries and an anthem sung in grief. My mind was moving in circles, trying to build a coherent picture out of pieces that did not yet fit together in a way I could hold. And while I was still turning it over in my mind, trying to make it make sense, trying to find the shape of it, I saw someone walking toward me. He was coming from a distance, not appearing suddenly the way figures in visions sometimes appear in the accounts I have read. He was walking from far away, moving steadily closer the way a person walks when they know where they are going and are not in a hurry but are not going to stop. I watched him come, and as he got closer, I could see that he looked like a man in his early 30s, a young man, not old. Not impressive in the way that humans expect impressive to look when they are imagining a supernatural being. He was not glowing in a blinding way. He was not wearing robes that announced holiness. He was simply a man walking toward me, and I watched him come, and my heart, or whatever the heart of a spirit is, began to do something I cannot name. A recognition that came before any other kind of knowing. A certainty that arrived in my chest and settled there before my mind had formed the thought. I knew it was Jesus. I knew it the way you know the voice of someone you love when you hear it in a crowd. Not by feature, not by detail, by something underneath feature and detail. By the quality of his presence, which was the quality of everything around me, intensified to a degree that I had no comparison for. He came to me, and he stood before me, and he was holding something. 4 scrolls. They were not large, but they had a weight about them that did not come from their physical dimensions, a weight of content, a weight of what was inside them. He held them without speaking for a moment, and then he began to reveal things to me. He revealed to me that what I had seen, the 4 sheep and the 4 lions, was not simply an image. He revealed that the 4 sheep represented 4 states within the United States of America, 4 places, 4 populations, and the lions they had been resting among, playing with, trusting, were nations that had positioned themselves as allies and friends and partners to America. Nations that America had trusted the way the sheep had trusted the lions, without fear, without the instinct that should have been present, without knowledge of the true nature of what they were in relationship with. He revealed to me that these nations, the lions, had held plans within themselves that America had not seen. Hidden plans. Plans that had been developing in the silence of the relationship while the friendship was visible on the surface. And the time had come for those plans to be executed. He revealed that 4 states would be the first to feel this, that they would be brought to their knees before the rest of the nation understood what was happening. And he showed me that when those first 4 states fell, the other states would need to understand that their own days were numbered in a new way. That what happened to the first 4 was a signal, not an isolated event. Then he handed me the first scroll. The first scroll showed me the state of California, a state with a population that stretches into the tens of millions. A state whose cities run into each other across hundreds of miles of coastline and valley, one of the most populated places in the entire country. What I saw was a strike, not an accident, not a natural event. A missile launched from a direction that pointed toward Eastern Europe, and the launch was not the act of a nation that America considered an open enemy. This was the act of a nation that had positioned itself carefully in the space between ally and adversary. A nation whose true intentions had been concealed behind diplomatic language and economic agreements. The missile struck California, and the shake that followed was not just the shake of an explosion. The detonation triggered something in the ground beneath the area of impact, a secondary seismic event, so that the destruction spread far beyond the point of impact. The blood that I saw in this vision was real, and the scale of it was something I tried to turn away from and could not because the showing was complete, and I was required to witness it fully. He revealed to me that 700 people died in the immediate aftermath. 700. I want you to feel the weight of that number. Each one of those 700 was a person with a name and a family, and a set of ordinary habits that would never be completed. 700 people whose morning had started the same as every other morning and did not end the same. The nation responded. He showed me the response, the urgency of it, the speed with which officials moved and agencies mobilized. But he also showed me that it was already too late in the specific sense that matters, which is that the response came after the thing that needed to be prevented had already happened. And for 7 days following the strike, he showed me the nation in a state of mourning, a collective heaviness that touched everything. The way a death in a family changes the air inside the house, even in the rooms where no one is speaking about it. Then he handed me the second scroll. The second scroll showed me the state of Texas. What I saw was not immediately visible as an attack. That was part of what made it so effective. It appeared first as a failure. The power grid of the state going dark, in a way that people interpreted as a technical problem, a failure of the system, the kind of thing that has happened before in smaller ways and been explained by weather or mechanical fault. People were frustrated. People were inconvenienced. People were worried. But the early understanding was that it was a grid failure, a breakdown, not an attack. He revealed to me that it was an attack, a coordinated attack targeted precisely at the power infrastructure of the state, executed by a nation that had presented itself to America as a friendly nation, a nation whose relationship with America was built on agreements and shared language and visible cooperation. The attack on the power grid was designed specifically to shift the attention of the American government and its agencies, because while every eye was on Texas and the darkness there, while every resource was being pointed at understanding what had happened and restoring power, something else was being done in another state, a more deadly plan, a plan that depended on the distraction. He showed me what the darkness did in Texas. He showed me the hospitals that run on electricity, whose machines breathe for people who cannot breathe for themselves, whose lights illuminate the operating rooms where surgeons work with the kind of precision that requires visibility. When the power went out, the backup systems came on, and then the backup systems ran down. He showed me people dying in ways that would not have killed them on an ordinary day. He showed me patients on dialysis machines when the machine stopped. He showed me premature infants in incubators when the temperature inside began to drop. He showed me ICU patients whose ventilators alarmed and then went silent. He showed me an emergency department receiving people by candlelight. He showed me a pharmacy whose refrigerated medications became useless within 24 hours. 4 specific categories of suffering that the darkness produced, and each one of them was a category of human lives that modern medicine had been keeping safe and that the darkness reached into and took back. Then he handed me the third scroll. The third scroll showed me the state of Florida. And what he showed me beginning in Florida was something that moved through the air and was invisible and had no border and no respect for the lines that human beings draw on maps to say, this is our place and that is yours. He revealed to me that there was a pathogen, an engineered pathogen, not something that had emerged from nature, not a virus that had evolved in an animal population and found its way into human beings, but something that had been deliberately constructed, built by people with the specific knowledge required to build such things, and released. The release he showed me had the precision of an intention. It was not an accident. It was not a contained experiment gone wrong. It was placed into the population of Florida with the design to spread, and it spread. He showed me the way it moved through communities and neighborhoods and families, the way it appeared first as something people thought they recognized, a fever, a cough, a heaviness in the chest, and only later revealed itself as something they had never seen before. By the time the full nature of it was understood, it was already beyond the borders of Florida and moving through other states. He showed me what it did to the economy. He revealed to me that whole sectors of commerce simply stopped because the people who made them run were sick or afraid or dead. He showed me what it did to the schools and the universities and the whole structure of education that the country depended on to continue producing the people it needed for its future. He showed me teachers who had given their working lives to education, men and women in their 50s and 60s who carried the knowledge and experience of decades, dying of this pathogen at rates that left classrooms without the people who knew how to run them. He showed me children going home from schools that had no one left to teach them, and sitting in houses with parents who had to choose between going to work and keeping their children safe. He showed me the quiet devastation of an entire generation of young people for whom the structure of normal learning simply disappeared. Then he handed me the fourth scroll. This is the one that made me weep. I want to be careful here because I do not want to give you the impression that I did not weep during the first three. I did. Each one of the things I was shown carried a weight that no human being can witness without responding to it with grief. But the fourth scroll was different, not because the images were more dramatic or the numbers were larger, but because of what kind of suffering it showed me. There is a particular kind of suffering that reaches into the part of a person that is not about injury or trauma in the immediate sense, but about something more fundamental to what it means to be a living human being. And that is the suffering of hunger and thirst. He showed me a shortage of water and food that touched the states that had already been wounded by everything that had come before, and then spread into the rest of the country in ways that followed the logic of what had been broken. When the power goes out in Texas, water treatment fails. When a pathogen moves through Florida, the supply chains that carry food from where it is grown to where it is eaten begin to break down because the people who drive the trucks and work the warehouses are sick or dead or afraid. When California is in mourning from a strike and a seismic event, the agricultural regions that feed enormous portions of the country are disrupted. He showed me how these things connected, how each of the first three scrolls had laid a piece of the foundation for the fourth. The shortage was not a separate catastrophe. It was the consequence of everything that had already happened, arriving in a form that the body cannot negotiate with the way the mind can sometimes negotiate with fear or grief. He showed me people hungry. He showed me people thirsty. He showed me mothers in stores that had no food in the sections where food was supposed to be. He showed me elderly people who had no way to receive the things they needed because the systems that delivered those things had broken down. He showed me the government trying. I want to be fair about that. He showed me people in positions of responsibility working hard and doing what they knew to do and doing it with genuine urgency. But the scale of what needed to be done exceeded the capacity of what could be done, and the gap between those two things was filled by the suffering of ordinary people who had done nothing to cause what was happening to them and could not do anything to stop it. And I wept. I wept in whatever way a spirit weeps, which is not the same as weeping in a body, but is no less real. I wept and he did not stop me. He stood there and he let me feel it, and I was grateful for that in a way that I cannot fully explain. The permission to feel the full weight of what you have been shown without being rushed past it into the lesson. That is a particular mercy, see. When the weeping had done what it needed to do, he showed me something else. He showed me a future within the future, a thing that was coming after everything I had already been shown, but that was connected to it in a direct way. He revealed to me that in the aftermath of all these events, in the space of disruption and need and the collapse of ordinary systems, something would be introduced, a technology, a biometric identification system, something that could be placed in the body. Something that carried with it the promise of solutions to genuine problems, the ability to track health, to organize resources, to identify people in a system that had lost its ordinary means of organization. He revealed to me that this system would be promoted as a recovery tool, that it would be presented as practical and compassionate and necessary, that people who were suffering would be offered it as a way out of the immediate crisis. And many would take it because the immediate crisis was real, and the suffering was real, and the offer appeared to be genuine help. He revealed to me that this system was connected to something described in the book of Revelation, that what would appear as a practical solution to immediate suffering was, in fact, the beginning of the mark that the scripture speaks of. And he was clear with me that this was not hidden information I was being given. It is in the book. It is already written. What I was being shown was the specific shape of it, the way it would come, the circumstances in which it would be offered, so that those who had ears to hear would recognize it when it arrived, and would not be confused by the genuine good it appeared to do. He revealed to me that the choice would be harder than people imagined, not because people would lack information, but because the circumstances in which the choice would be made would be circumstances of real desperation. Hungry people, sick people, people who were trying to keep their children alive. And in those circumstances, the arguments for accepting the system would feel very reasonable, and the arguments against it would feel very abstract. He wanted me to carry this back and say it plainly, so that people would have the language for the moment before the moment arrived, so that the choice would not be made without understanding what was being chosen. And then, gradually, the quality of everything around me began to change. The best way I can describe it is that the fullness of the place began to become less full, not dark, not diminishing in the sense of light going away, but the total completeness of it, the overwhelming fairness of it, was receding, the way the sound of music recedes when someone is turning down the volume, slowly, note by note, until you are listening to the memory of it as much as the sound itself. And I became aware of my body, not all at once, but the way you sometimes become aware in the early moments of waking, before you are fully awake, that you have a body, and it is lying in a bed, somewhere, and the world of the dream is still present, but the world of the body is beginning to assert its reality over the top of it. I felt the mattress. I felt the pressure of it against my back and my shoulders. I felt the stiffness of my joints the way I feel them every morning. That particular ache that belongs to a person who has been alive for 61 years and carries that fact in his skeleton. I felt the tube in my arm. I felt the weight of the blanket. All of this came back to me gradually, and with a strange quality of heaviness that I had not noticed before the place I had been took it from me. I opened my eyes. The ceiling of the hospital room was above me, white. The light was the kind of light that hospitals use, a flat, even brightness that has nothing of the quality of the light I had been in moments before. My wife was there. She was sitting in the chair beside the bed, and she had her hand over her mouth and she was crying. But the kind of crying that happens when you have been afraid and the fear has just let go of you. The relief kind of crying, which in some ways is more intense than the fear itself. She saw my eyes open and she made a sound that I will carry with me until I die again. And this time I hope the dying is final and the place I arrive at is the one I left. Natalia, my wife of 34 years. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when we were young, and the world had not yet taught us how much it would ask of us. I tried to speak, and my throat was wrong in the way that throats are when they have had things in them. I managed her name, just her name. That was enough for several minutes. There were nurses. There were doctors. There was the specific ordered confusion of medical people doing their work around a patient who has just returned from somewhere his body was not supposed to be able to return from. I answered their questions. I told them my name. I told them the date. I told them where I was, all correct. I watched their professional relief at correct answers, and I thought, quietly, in the part of me that was already carrying everything I had been shown, I thought about how different the answers that mattered were from the answers they were asking for. I lay in that bed for 3 days after that before they let me go home. And every one of those 3 days, I carried what I had been shown with the same completeness that I had carried it in the moment it was given to me. Not fading, not dimming at the edges the way memories usually do. Present and full and detailed and demanding to be spoken. I am speaking it now. I am not a prophet. That is not a title I would ever claim for myself because I understand what the word carries. And I am not that man. I am a pastor, an old pastor. A man who has spent his life trying to say true things about God to people who need to hear true things about God. And what I am saying now is the truest thing I have ever been required to say, which means it is also the hardest thing I have ever been required to say. Because true things that carry weight like this do not sit comfortably in the mouth or on the page. Let me be direct with you now, in the way that a person who does not have a lot of time or a lot of extra words can be direct. I am speaking to you as a believer. If you are not a believer, I invite you to keep reading because what I am saying is relevant to your life, regardless of what you believe. But I am speaking most directly to those of you who know God, who have a relationship with Jesus Christ, who have a Bible in your home, and some version of a prayer life and some community of faith that you belong to. The days that are coming are going to be hard. I want to say that plainly without softening it in the way that people sometimes soften hard things to make them easier to receive and end up making them impossible to prepare for. They are going to be hard. The events I was shown are not minor disruptions. They are the kind of events that change the shape of a nation and the shape of the lives of every person who lives within it. And the question that I was sent back to ask you, the question I was given the specific and commissioned purpose of placing before you, is whether your faith is the kind that is built on something that can hold weight, not the faith of conference attendance, not the faith of correct theological positions stored in the mind like furniture in a room that no one lives in, not the faith that shows up on Sunday and disappears into the week and resurfaces the next Sunday. I am talking about the kind of faith that is a daily practice. The kind of faith that is rooted in actual reading of the actual Word of God, not as a religious exercise, but as a man or woman who is eating because they are hungry. The kind of faith that is built on prayer that is real, not performed. Prayer that happens in private. Prayer that costs you something, the way any real conversation costs you something, because you have to be present for it. Stay in the Word of God. I say this not as a religious phrase that pastors say because it is what pastors say. I say it because what is coming will attack the mind and the emotions and the sense of stability that people carry when they feel that the world makes sense. When the world stops making sense in the specific and dramatic ways that I was shown, you will need something inside you that does not depend on the world making sense. The Word of God is that something. It has sustained people through disasters and persecutions and famines and the collapse of nations for thousands of years. It will sustain you through what is coming if you have put it in yourself before the coming arrives. Pray, daily, not as a ritual, not as a box to check, as a person who is in a relationship with someone who loves them and who has something to say to them and who needs to hear from them in return. The elect of Jesus will be preserved. He told me this. He showed me this. He showed me communities of people who were holding each other and holding their faith and extending their hands to people who had nothing. And they were alive and they were not diminished, and the word that came to my mind when I saw them, and the word that came from him when he looked at them was mine. These are mine. He said it with a tenderness that I am still feeling as I write this. Build community, not the isolated fortress version of preparation that turns into a closed hand. The open-handed version. The version that stores and prepares because it intends to share. The version that develops skills in order to teach them. The version that understands that no single person weathers a civilizational disruption alone, and that the Bible's picture of the faithful has always been a picture of people together, not individuals in separate rooms congratulating themselves on their doctrine. Do not take what is offered when the time comes to offer it, if it is the thing I was shown being offered. You will recognize it by its qualities, by the way it connects to the body, by the way it is promoted as the only practical solution. By the way, refusing it places you outside the system of access to the things you need. The scripture has prepared you for this recognition. Read it again. Read Revelation again with the events I have described in your mind, not to be afraid, but to be ready to recognize. I am an old Russian pastor sitting in his study in Tver, writing these words in English that is not my first language, and I know how that sounds. I know what most people will do when they encounter a message like this. I know the many good reasons that intelligent and faithful people have for being cautious about such accounts. I hold no bitterness toward anyone who reads this and is not moved by it. Disbelief is a reasonable response. I understand it. I have felt it myself in the years before the 14th of June. But I was also standing in that luminous place. I was also shown those scrolls. I also heard the anthem of a nation being sung in grief. I also wept in a way that my body still carries the echo of even now. Weeks after the morning, when my heart stopped in a hospital corridor and I went to the place where the truth of things is visible without the mediating cloudiness of ordinary perception, he sent me back to say what I saw. He told me that the ones who needed to hear it would hear it and that this was enough. I am saying it. I am trusting that what he told me is true. The elect of Jesus will be preserved. That is the first thing I said, and I will make it the last thing as well. Not because I want to end on something that sounds hopeful, after saying things that are heavy, but because it is the most important piece of what I was given, more important than any specific event or specific date or specific state. The preservation of the elect is the point, not the disasters. The disasters are not the story. The story is that in the middle of everything that is coming, he is not absent, he is not surprised, he is not overwhelmed. He sees the people who belong to him and he holds them and he calls them his, And that word, that simple possessive, is the word that everything else I was shown rests on. Prepare, pray, stay in the word, build community with an open hand, hold your faith not as information but as life, and know that the one who showed me these things sees you and has always seen you and does not intend to lose you. That is all I have. That is everything. I have been asked, since I returned and began telling people what happened to me, whether I was afraid while I was there, whether the things I was shown frightened me in the way that frightening things frighten you in ordinary life. And the honest answer is complicated. There was no fear in the luminous place itself, not the ordinary animal fear that the body carries as a protective mechanism. But there was something that is harder to name, something that shares a quality with fear without being fear exactly. It was the feeling of being given something that is very heavy and very specific and very real, and understanding that you are responsible for carrying it back and saying it clearly. That is not fear in the sense of danger to the self. It is a different kind of weight, the weight of a message, the weight of a commission. A man in my position, an old pastor in a small Russian city, does not have obvious reasons to be trusted when he says he has been shown things about America. I understand this. I have thought about it many times since I came home from the hospital. Why would God show an old Russian pastor in Tver the events that are coming to the United States of America? I do not have a complete answer to that question. I do not think the complete answer is mine to have. What I have is the experience itself, and the fact that I was shown what I was shown and told to carry it back and say it plainly. Whether that makes sense to you in terms of why it would be me specifically is less important than what was shown, which has nothing to do with me and everything to do with what is coming. But I will say this. God has never, in all the history of the scripture or in all the history of the church that I have spent my life studying, been limited in his choice of messengers by the logic that human beings would apply to the selection. He has used fishermen and farmers and tax collectors and tent makers and people from outside the communities that received the message. He has spoken through people who were not eloquent and people who were not prominent and people whose background gave no obvious credential to the thing they were being asked to say. I am not claiming this as a vindication of myself. I am simply noting that the logic of who gets to carry a message has never been the logic of the message itself. What I want to say to American believers specifically, and I am saying this with the full weight of my 30 years of pastoral experience behind it, is that the particular danger of the season you are entering is not primarily physical. The physical dangers are real and they are coming, and I have tried to describe them with as much honesty and precision as I was shown them. But the greater danger, the one that he returned to again and again as he showed me these events, is spiritual. The danger of faith that has not been sufficiently rooted to hold when the ground begins to shake. And I mean that in every sense of the phrase. The literal shaking of the ground that several of the events I was shown involve, and the metaphorical shaking of everything that people have built their ordinary sense of stability on. American Christianity, from what I have observed across my years of ministry, which has included relationships with American pastors and missionaries and theological works, has in many places developed a faith that is comfortable, not in a malicious way, not because people chose comfort over depth deliberately, but because comfort was available and depth requires suffering, and when suffering is not required, the muscles of the spirit that suffering builds do not develop the same way they develop under pressure. I have seen this in my own congregation in periods of relative ease. Faith is easier to perform than to possess when nothing is asking it to be real. What is coming will ask it to be real. And I want to be clear about something that I feel strongly about. The events I have described are not punishment. I want to say this plainly because there is a theology, a way of reading disaster that interprets it as the wrath of God against a sinful nation, and that theology, while it has some scriptural support in certain contexts, is not the frame in which these things were shown to me. What I was shown was the consequence of human decisions, decisions made by nations that chose to pursue their interests through deception and violence, decisions made by people who built systems of vulnerability into infrastructure that should have been protected, decisions made over years and decades that created the conditions for these specific disasters. God was not absent from what I was shown, but the attribution I was given was not wrath. It was grief, the same grief I felt coming from him when I watched the anthem sung in mourning. A God who grieves the suffering of the people he made is not a God who manufactured that suffering as a judgment. He is a God who watches what human beings do to each other and to themselves, and carries the weight of it in a way that, in 17 minutes above a nation I have never lived in, I was allowed to feel the edge of. I have never felt anything like it, and I would not wish the feeling on anyone in its full form, though I am also grateful I was allowed to feel it, because it changed the way I understand the word compassion. What I had called compassion before that morning was something much smaller. What I felt standing in that luminous place watching a nation's anthem being sung in grief while a God who loved that nation grieved alongside it. That is the scale of the word. I am carrying that feeling into every conversation I have had since, and it has made me a better pastor in ways that I did not know I needed to be better. I am also carrying the memory of the communities he showed me, the ones who had prepared with open hands, the ones who were sharing what they had and teaching what they knew and extending grace to people who had made choices they could not undo. I want to give that memory more space here because I think it is as important as anything I have said about what is coming, maybe more important. Because what is coming is not the end of the story. What those communities showed me is that faithfulness does not stop when things become hard. Faithfulness may in fact be more itself when things become hard. The capacity to remain generous when the temptation to close the fist is enormous. The capacity to remain in community when every instinct says protect only yourself and your own. The capacity to extend grace to people who chose wrongly and are living with the consequences of that choice. These are not small things. They are very large things. And they are available to you now, in the way that a muscle you train now will be strong when you need it. That is the preparation I am urging. Not primarily the physical preparation, though the physical preparation matters, and I am not dismissing it. Store food if you are able. Have water. Have the things your family needs to survive a disruption of the supply chains that carry ordinary life from one day to the next. Be wise about the practical things, but do not let the practical things replace the deeper preparation, which is the preparation of the spirit. The preparation that makes you capable of remaining yourself, remaining faithful, remaining generous, when everything around you is telling you that self-preservation is the only rational response. He showed me that the ones who approached the crisis with the spirit of self-preservation as their primary framework survived it in the narrow sense and diminished in the fuller sense. Their theology was correct, but their spirit had gone hard, and the hardness kept out things that they needed as badly as food and water. He did not look at those communities with contempt. He looked at them with sorrow. The kind of sorrow you feel for someone who had everything they needed to do something beautiful and chose, out of fear, to do something smaller. I do not want that for you. I do not want that for myself. And I do not believe that has to be the outcome. The choice is still available. The choice to build the kind of faith and the kind of community that will not close its hand when the crisis comes. That choice is available right now, today, before any of what I was shown has arrived. Make the choice now. Make it while it is still a free and uncomplicated choice and not a desperate scramble. Let the faith that you have been carrying, wherever you are in that, become more fully itself in the days ahead. Read the word, pray. Find your people and be present to them with a generosity that is rooted in something deeper than circumstances. And trust. Not as a feeling that you manufacture, but as a decision that you make. Trust the one who told me that the elect of Jesus will be preserved. He is faithful. He has always been faithful. The events I was shown do not change that. They are in a way that I am still processing and may never fully articulate, surrounded by his faithfulness the way a storm is surrounded by the sky. The storm is real. The storm does damage. The storm is not metaphor, but it is held within something larger than itself, and the something larger is the one who holds it, and he has not let go of you. That is the message. That is the whole of it. I am an old pastor in Tiver, and I was shown these things, and I am saying them in the only language I have available to anyone who will stay in the room long enough to hear them. Stay in the room.